avid outdoorsman here. I've spent a great deal of time in the backcountry of Utah. I'm also a scientist. I was hiking with my wife and 2 kids, 6 and 8 at the time, in Bryce Canyon National Park on July 14th, 2018. We were near the top of Queen's Garden Trail at sunset. I'm a huge fan of the outdoors and am also an avid cryptid enthusiast. I have personally seen multiple Bigfoots in Carolina, Colorado, South Dakota, Nebraska, and Montana. My family and I were all looking around at the beautiful scenery. We have been nature freaks growing up and have raised our kids the same. Suddenly, my 6-year-old daughter points something out. "Dad, what's that?" I turned around and saw a large dark creature standing about 20 yards away on the edge of the trail. It was kind of leaning against a tree. I could not see its face, it was turned away from us. The creature was very large and dark, almost black. It was not human. I immediately grabbed my kids, and we began running down the trail. I looked back over my shoulder and saw the creature chasing after us. We ran all the way to the bottom of the trail, which was about half a mile, and it was gone. Now, what I find unusual about this encounter is that my wife and kids never saw a creature like this before. I have also investigated many sightings, but nothing like what we had encountered that night. It's possible this could have been a Bigfoot, but I've seen black bear and goats in the area before, which can be dark colored. Bryce Canyon is not known for any other sightings or cryptids, I think. It's possible we encountered something unknown, possibly paranormal, although I'm not sure. I've worked in law enforcement for well over 20 years now. I grew up in the area and have been going to Bryce Canyon since I was a kid. I've been a hunter and fisherman all my life, so I'm not some city slicker. I was on a ranger-led tour in the canyon on September 14th, around 11 a.m. The group was about halfway through the canyon when I spotted something moving on a ledge above us, about 100 yards away. I pointed it out to the ranger, and we all watched as it slowly lumbered across the ledge, then disappeared behind a rock formation. It was definitely not a deer or any other type of animal that I'm familiar with. I've never seen anything like it before. It was black, had long arms that hung down below its knees. Its head was slightly larger than its torso. It did not look like anything I've ever seen. It wasn't anything that other people on the tour have seen either. I'm not sure what it was. It gave me a creepy feeling, and it's been on my mind ever since. One thing I noticed about it was that whatever it was, there was no visible neck or anything. Just a big block-type head that appeared to flow into the rest of its body and long arms. I think it was male, but I'm not sure about that either. That's pretty much it. Just thought you might want to know, and I think you should pass this on. I used to be in the military, and am now a general contractor. I'm also an Eagle Scout, and have been camping and hiking all my life. I am very familiar with the area around Monroe Peak in Utah, having hiked it many times. I've also been deployed to the Middle East and have spent a lot of time in the desert and mountains there. Anyway, this is my story. I was out hiking with my dog on Monroe Peak on February 2nd, 2019, when I saw something strange. I was near the summit, just below the radio towers, when I saw what looked like a large black bear walking across the ridgeline about 100 yards away from me. The thing was huge, easily the largest black bear I'd ever seen, but its body was more elongated and its head was too small for that of a black bear. It had very long legs and walked upright like a human would. It was definitely not a black bear. I realized that very quick. I was terrified, quickly running down the mountainside, leaving my dog behind. I've never been so frightened in my life. I did not get a chance to get a good look at the creature's face, but it definitely was not a black bear, and it was definitely not a human. Plus, I was pretty high up and it was sunny out. There's no way this could have been a trick of the light. Has anybody else seen anything similar? I'm scared to go back up there. This is also one of several accounts with strange cryptids on Monroe Peak in Utah. In the fall of 2018, 2 other hikers had reported seeing a large black creature they believed to be a Sasquatch. And in June of 2018, another group of hikers reportedly saw a small gray creature they may believe to have been a chupacabra. These sightings are particularly concerning because Monroe Peak is located in an area known as the 9 Mile Canyon, a well-known area for its many paranormal activity. The canyon is said to be haunted by ghosts of Native American warriors killed in battle. They still roam the hills searching for their lost loved ones. Strange lights have also been seen in the canyon at night, and a number of ghosts have been reported amongst numerous cryptid sightings and strange magnetic anomalies. I'm a police officer in a suburb north of Salt Lake City, Utah. I've been with the department now for around 5 years, and with law enforcement in general for 10. During the daytime, I work as a patrol officer, and during my off time, I help run a cryptozoology/ghost hunting group, investigating alien abductions, cryptids, and other haunted areas. We get called to more than our fair share of suicides, but more often than not, we get to debunk calls from family members who don't want their loved ones labeled as crazy, so they call us instead of the actual authorities. It was just another day at work, and we had already gone out to several suicide calls. I decided to take it easy and not to go on anymore. I was on patrol and decided to take a quick break in my squad car and just relax for a few moments, and I noticed something moving. A large black creature, standing around 7 feet tall with long, thin arms. It was very thin and lanky, almost skeletal. It did not appear to have any fur or hair on its body, and its eyes were stark black. It stood there for a few seconds and began to move very, very quickly. I could not believe what I was seeing. I immediately got out of my car to try and get a better look at it, but unfortunately, it disappeared quickly into the darkness, and I could not find it anywhere. I was dumbfounded by what I had just seen and still can't believe it had happened. I'm not the only one who has seen this creature either. My friend and fellow investigator also saw it a few months ago near Moon Lake. We have no idea what this thing is, but it's definitely real and out there somewhere. I'm honestly scared to death of it, whatever it is. I have had several other people contact me with similar sightings in the same area, so it's definitely something worth investigating. Has anybody else heard or seen anything like this in Utah? Please let me know if you have. I'd prefer to know I'm not totally insane and I'm not the only person who has seen it. I've had 3 separate sightings. The first 2 were in Utah State, and the last one was almost exactly 2 years ago on my property here in Washington State, where I currently live. It's what finally drove me to leave Utah. The first sighting took place when I was about 9 years old. I'm now 36. My parents and I went camping at this little spot up near East Canyon Reservoir that isn't really an official campground, but you can drive into there and park. It's mainly used by hunters during deer season, and if you're lucky enough, your camp will be broken into by deer thieves. Joking. Anyway, we hiked out a ways with our dog, like we always did, and decided to set up camp for the night. We did not stay in the official campsites because they were all taken, and there was no privacy. So we found a spot that had been used before, under a large aspen tree. After we got our tent set up, my father started a fire, and my mom was cooking dinner. I remember that night was very windy. I was cold, so I went over to the fire to warm up. That's when I saw it. It was standing maybe 50 yards away from us, watching us, like a person would watch something they're curious about. It was shaped kind of like a wolverine, but walking on 2 legs. It was not hunched over like a wolverine, but it moved kind of like a person would, and it was huge. The body length was easily 7 feet tall, It was taller than I, and after a few moments, it turned around and walked off into the forest. We packed up our stuff and left after that. My parents saw it and it freaked them out. The second sighting happened roughly 10 years later. I was still living in Utah at the time and working on an archaeology crew, doing survey work in the middle of nowhere. We were the only people around for miles. We were out in the desert doing a grid search. I was walking down one of the lines when I saw this weird animal standing about roughly 20 yards away. At first, I assumed it was a coyote, but I noticed its tail was different. It was dog-like in general, but completely covered in reddish-brown or chocolate-covered fur. I stood there watching it curiously, and then, very slowly, it turned around and took several steps toward me before I could get my wits about me, enough to yell out, "Hey," after it. There's no way this was a coyote because of how large it was. If I had to guess an animal size comparison, I'd say it's roughly 2 feet wide. Now, the third sighting happened when I lived in West Valley City, near Salt Lake. A friend of mine who used to work on farms told me he had to quit his job there because every time he saw it, it would be watching him, just out of his sight. He said it was the size of a large man and built very powerfully. He also told me it would stand on 2 legs and watch him for minutes at a time before disappearing back into the trees, like it was planning something, plotting to grab him. I think there were other guys working at this farm too who saw it, but they didn't say anything. I was also going through a pretty bad divorce at the time with my high school sweetheart, so that was really hard to deal with. A very stressful time. I will say this though, I've always been interested in the paranormal and have gone on quite a few investigations. I'm not saying that all these sightings are cryptids, but I do believe there's more to this world than what we can see with our eyes. I think it's possible more creatures than we imagine exist. But what I described to you, I have no answers for. Thank you for listening. I grew up in Salt Lake City, went to school at BYU, and am now a contractor living near Big Cottonwood Canyon. I am sound of mind and have nothing to gain from this, just reporting what I saw happen. I was driving home on the Canyon Road at about roughly maybe 8 to 9 p.m. on a Saturday night. It had been raining that day, so there were a lot of just washed surfaces around. As I drove up the curvy road, my windshield wipers were going full speed as visibility was limited due to the rain and mist blowing off the mountain slopes surrounding me. Just as I passed Wasatch Boulevard, the mist parted for a second and revealed something with very bright eyes, about 8 inches in diameter, standing right near my car on the passenger side. It was just there. I had not seen it or felt it approach. The being I was looking at was very thin and had a head that was disproportionately large in comparison to its body size. The eyes were completely black, devoid of pupils, iris, or anything else. This thing did not make any noise, move, or react in any way. I only saw it for a second as the mist quickly enclosed and around it again. I immediately accelerated and drove home. When I got out of the car, my hands were shaking uncontrollably and my heart was pounding so hard, it was the equivalent of chugging a 6-shot espresso. Listen, I've been through a lot of paranormal experiences in my life, but I'm terrified of this memory. This thing is not human. I've been told there are a lot of military underground bases in the area. Could it be something from one of those? Possibly experiments or genetic experiment gone wrong. I have no idea. I've never felt like this before about any paranormal thing, and I'm really shaken by it. The eyes were almost reptilian in appearance, but there's something much worse about them that I can't put my finger on. I would never want to meet one of these beings outside my car at night on a secluded road. Not now, not ever. In 2007, I did some training for my job and was qualified to carry a firearm. I wanted to get more training, so I got into handgun shooting and carried it concealed at the time. I'm 42 years old, born in Pocatello, Idaho. My family moved to Mapleton, Utah when I was 2, so I basically grew up there. Other than college years spent abroad, England and California, this is my home base. The area we used to hunt is called South Hills, located near Layton, Utah, about halfway between Salt Lake and Ogden, on Highway 89 headed south towards Provo. It's referred to as the Hills by locals, but it actually starts about 300 feet above sea level, rising fairly quickly west of the highway. The goal was to be able to sit in the area and call animals in without them catching our scent. We would use smell generators to power single-line bulbs attached to wooden crosses. The plan was that when it got dark, we would start placing these lights down at about 200-yard intervals across an area bordered by 2 dirt roads. During the day, it's a very nice forested area with medium-sized hills. Nothing too steep or treacherous. Perfect for us city boys who haven't seen this kind of wilderness before. Lots of jackrabbits, deer, etc. There are also coyote, skunks, raccoons, wild cats, bobcat I think, but never saw any bears or mountain lions which are said to roam the area. We would set up our light stations and then get in position to call the game in. As soon as it started getting dark, we would hear things moving around out there, sometimes very close by. We would see eye shine from various animals, but never anything that caused us concern. On this particular night, while sitting with my back against a large tree, waiting for my partner to return from placing another light, I heard a noise above me. It sounded like a large bat or a vulture flying very close by. Then, landing on one of the limbs just near my head, I pulled out my flashlight, shined it up, and saw a very large creature looking down at me from about 20 feet away. It was much too big to be a bat, vulture, or any other kind of natural animal. The light lit up its face, but all I caught were quick glances without much clarity. Whatever it was sat there for what seemed like minutes, but most likely not, and then took off in flight. It's hard to judge speed when you're dealing with something that belongs in the X-Files. I remember this encounter well. We were taught that if we encountered a mountain lion in the wild, the best thing to do was to very quietly and slowly back away. Well, that's what I tried to do. But then it dawned on me that this thing didn't seem concerned about me at all. Neither did it act or look like anything I'd ever seen before, so I decided not to play dead. It flew off and I never saw it again. I will say, though, that whatever creature this was, it was hideous. And its wings were so huge, I'm talking nearly 8 feet across. It had grayish skin with long, thin arms and short legs with clawed hands. Its wings were very bat-like, except the wingspan was wider than its body. The head was maybe 2 or 3 times too large for its body, an elongated dome sort of shape that reminded me of a vulture but more hideous and deformed. The physical encounter lasted no longer than 5 minutes, but that image of that thing's face and body is forever burned in my memory, permanently. Right after this experience, I tried to read up on some Bigfoot sightings here in Utah and found there were quite a few. If you check any maps for reported Bigfoot sightings, you'll find that sure enough, Big Cottonwood Canyon are plentiful of them. I was out bow hunting in southern Utah just a few years back with my brother. We were walking through a meadow that was bordered by a thicket of trees. We had just walked around the edge of the meadow and were about to enter the woods when we heard something large flying overhead. It was huge. We both stopped and looked up, but we couldn't see what it was. It was too dark. It sounded like a cross between a bat and a bird, and it had wings the size of a human's arms. It flew off and we never saw it again. After doing some research, I found out that this large bat-winged cryptid could be the giant screech owl. They have a wingspan of about 6 feet and can take prey up to the size of a skunk or a raccoon. They are typically nocturnal and prefer woodlands, so it is possible that this eyewitness sighting was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. However, I thought you might find this information interesting. After all, Utah is full of weird things, cryptids and entities, and a lot of paranormal activity. I've never seen anything anywhere else like it. If I ever saw it again, I'd be too scared to do anything about it. I wouldn't even know what to do. You hear the stories about people being abducted by aliens, and especially out here, which are probably just interdimensional beings who could pass through solid objects and enter in and out of our world. Nobody really knows for sure, but giant bats, I believe that's what that thing was, and not a screech owl. People here have seen them quite a bit. They're very secretive and keep to themselves most of the time. There's so much hunting going on sometimes that my brother was also in an area known as Goblin Valley State Park, and he himself saw one fly over him at around 1 o'clock in the morning. This was back in 2009. He said it looked something like out of Lord of the Rings. They usually move around at night, so they could really blend in if they want to. It's possible there could only be one living right under your nose, and you wouldn't even know it. They too might be interdimensional. Not too sure. My friend also said he wasn't hunting in the dark anymore after seeing this thing fly over him at night. He didn't tell me what happened to his brother, though, during his Goblin Valley sighting. But now, I guess I know why he stopped hunting by himself at night. I think these are things just flying around here, watching us all the time. Nobody really knows who or what they are. It's really creepy. I also have a lot of personal experiences with these kinds of things. A lot of my friends and family who I've worked on investigations with all have had some kind of encounter with a strange bat-like cryptid. They're here. We just can't figure out why. I'm 23 and 6'3", weighing around 215 pounds. When I was 12, this is when my story would happen. My family were on vacation in the Cottonwood Heights area of Utah, between Salt Lake City and Big Cottonwood Canyon, the canyon that is home to the Albion Basin Ski Resort. We were walking up a dirt road towards the mountain we planned to go hiking. The time was early in the evening, maybe even dusk. It was still light out, but there weren't many cars on the road at the time, and the sky was beginning to change. As we're walking up this dirt road, my mother, father, brothers, and me, I saw what looked like an ape man running across in front of us. I remember feeling terrified and thinking this thing was going to attack us. It was running on 2 legs and was covered in dark hair. After it disappeared, it jumped up on a boulder and then disappeared a second time into the woods on the other side. It was definitely not anything human-like, and I remember being terrified after seeing it. Somehow, my family's lucky. They did not see it. They were a few steps behind me, so I could not point it out to them. I didn't think much of it at the time. We explored for a few more hours and never saw anything else like that. Also, about 2 years ago, again, I'm 23 now, I had this other experience. My buddy and I were driving a big Cottonwood Canyon road in his car. This time, it was dark outside. We were just looking at all the houses. When we got about halfway up, my friend said, "Hey man, check it out," as he pointed ahead on the road. In front of us, where there is a turnoff from the main road, there was this figure standing next to one of those orange cones blocking off access to another dirt road. The man appeared to be completely naked and covered in hair. He looked almost identical to the creature I saw when I was 12. He had to at least be around 8 feet tall. He didn't move, just stood there next to the cone, looking down the direction of the road where we were driving. My friend then slammed on the gas of his car and got out of there as fast as possible. Once again, neither my friend nor I knew what it was, but I know what it wasn't. It was not human. It's also important to note that Big Cottonwood Canyon Road hosts some rather infamous activity. There have been several other reports of maulings by an unidentified animal, strange UFO sightings near Brighton Ski Resort, encounters with Bigfoot-like creatures all throughout Salt Lake Valley, and most notably, the Draper case, a series of events in which an interdimensional being stalked and terrorized a family for months. While it is difficult to say what this creature may have been, the description of the man as seen are very similar to other reports of entities encountered all over the state of Utah. It is possible that this is a warning sign from whatever beings are behind these strange encounters. Whatever the case may be, it is clear something is happening in Utah, and we are yet to understand. I've studied cryptids and the paranormal since I was young. Although, while I've never seen a Bigfoot, at least from what I know, I'm an experienced outdoorsman. I've spent a lot of time in the canyons and high deserts around Kanab. About a month ago, on a Saturday morning, my wife and I were driving to church. We turned off of Highway 89 onto a dirt road. This leads to some BLM land near Canyonlands National Park, about a fourth mile down the road, and we saw something flying over low over the desert floor. It was big, much bigger than any bird I've ever seen. The wingspan had to have at least been 20 to 25 feet, easily. It was dark brown, or pale. It also had a long tail, with a sort of spade at the end. It was flying erratically, almost as if it were drunk. We watched it for a few seconds until it disappeared behind a rock face. Now, I know what I saw, and there's no way it was a bird. I'm convinced that what I saw was a form of a pterosaur. I also know about some other pterosaur sightings that have happened right around the Great Salt Lake. I'm not exactly saying that's what I saw, but it's definitely strange, and there have been other sightings in the area. After doing some research of my own, I have found several other eyewitness accounts of what people are calling living pterodactyls. It's possible that these creatures are surviving pterosaurs. I've even spoken to a paleontologist at the University of Utah about what I saw. His hypothesis is that it was most likely a young condor or something like that. I guess he would be the expert, but I know what condors look like. This did not look like that. If you've ever seen Jurassic Park, this looked like it flew right out of the movie. The thing I'm interested in now is why all the sightings have seemed to be located around large bodies of water. The Great Salt Lake and Canyonlands National Park. Maybe they use lakes for drinking. I'm not sure. This area alone has seen a recent increase in the number of cryptid sightings. I think it's important that we investigate these creatures and find out what they are and why they are here. Let's also not forget about all the UFO activity that has been going on around the Great Salt Lake. Could there be a possible connection in any way? 44 years old, ex-military, ex-law enforcement. I've seen a lot of things in my life and don't scare easily. I was raised around guns and hunting. I now live in the country, on 5 acres. So this takes us back a while. I was deer hunting about 18 miles north of Fairview, Utah, up on the mountain near South Tent Mountain, when I saw what I thought was a large man walking through thick woods, about 70 plus yards away from me. As I watched it walk across an open area, it became very clear and apparent this was not a man. This creature was at least 8 feet tall and covered in hair. It had a very wide chest and its arms hung down to its knees. It was also very muscular. I immediately became very afraid and began to back away from the area. I watched it walk into the woods on the other side of the open area and disappear. Then it did something very strange. About 5 minutes later, it walked back out of the woods into the open area again, and this time, it was only about 50 yards away from me. I could see its face very clearly, due to the lighting. Its face was very human-like, but the eyes were solid black, and there was no nose or mouth that I could discernibly see. It could be just because of the skin tone. It stood there, looking over in my direction for a few seconds, but I don't know if it saw me or not, because I was in full camouflage. It turned around and walked back into the woods. I'm not totally sure what I saw, but it was definitely not any animal I've ever seen before. I am 100% certain that what it was no man in a costume or anything like that. I'm still very shaken up by what I saw. I mean, after all, this was right around 9,000 feet elevation. For somebody to be up here, prancing around the woods in a Bigfoot costume, would not make any sense. Friends of mine have told me too they've heard strange calls up that mountain from time to time, but no one in our circle of friends has ever been up there. It's a very, very remote area. I've talked to a few people too who live in the general area, and they confirmed there are strange things going on up there near South Tent Mountain. One man I talked to said he also saw a group of ape-like creatures walking behind his yard about 15 years ago. This same man has also seen several large black bear near his property and several deer. If these creatures do indeed hunt deer, like bear do, it would make sense that these creatures would follow the food supply. I was out hiking with my family in the foothills of the Wasatch Mountains, east of Salt Lake City. The hiking trail is a relatively easy one with a moderate incline. It leads to an overlook of a reservoir and a vista of Mount Timpanogos in the distance. The hike starts at Aspen Grove, which is an alpine forest with over 20 miles of trails that connects to the city to mountain summits. It takes roughly 4 hours to complete the entire 16-mile round-trip hike. The trail also runs along the Provo River and has large open meadows with wildflower in season for about 4 miles, until it reaches the southwestern slope of Mount Timpanogos, where you would go up steep switchbacks through dense second-growth forest to its summit. We had been overdue for a family hike, and we were headed up for a hike up Mount Timpanogos. The trails in the area are also very popular, and we hadn't surprisingly seen anybody else at all on the trail since we'd begun. We were only about a mile in from the trailhead when we saw something large moving in the distance. At first, we all thought it was an exceptionally large coyote, but then it did something that startled all of us. It stood up. I could see now that it was larger than any coyote I'd ever seen, and this thing was now definitely not a coyote. This creature looked a little bit different. It had a long snout, very large pointed ears. It actually kind of reminded me more of a hyena than it did a coyote. It was also covered in gray and red fur and kind of had more hunched over posture, like it was carrying a lot of its weight awkwardly. Its eyes were also glowing a faint red, and I knew right away, upon seeing this thing, there was nothing natural about it. And instantly, my family and I understood we were in danger. The thing just stood there staring at us for a few seconds before finally turning and disappearing. I felt like it was studying us, like it knew who we were and what we were doing there. It gave me the creeps. I've been hiking the Wasatch Mountains my whole life, and this was a first. I'm not sure what it was, but it still gives me the chills when I think about it. I've also reported my sighting to the local authorities. They just told me I probably saw a bear. Figures. I know it was not a bear. There was a feeling of utter terror that had taken hold of me. I knew that I was in danger, and it made sense to be afraid of the creature. The creature was taking advantage of my vulnerability. That day, I saw a large, furry, unknown bipedal humanoid. I don't know what it was. I like to consider myself a rational, sensible investigator. I'm not quick to draw conclusions about the paranormal or supernatural, but I attempt to keep an open mind. When I was around 6, I knew not what fear was, nor did it scare me. I used to run around my house at night with a blanket over my head, screaming like a banshee. My parents could do nothing but let me get it out of my system. As time went on for about a couple more years, I would have moments where I would think somebody was watching me. This continued happening more and more often, until one day, when right near our backyard, which was full of trees that bordered an area with woods behind them, while walking back to the house from our hay barn, I heard footsteps walking beside me. I turned, quickly thinking it was maybe my dad trying to play a prank on me. since he's like that. And I saw this hideous face, this figure. It looked kind of like a goat, but more human at the same time. Its horns on its head were very much like a ram's, except twisted and spiraled and pointed upward and backwards. Its eyes glowed this ominous orange, and it appeared to have a very angry look on its face. Angry, like I caught it. I'll tell you what, I can never forget the bad vibes that washed over my entire body. It was like something bad was about to happen to me if I did not get out of there. It's been a long time after that experience, and I still feel like those memories are just as vivid as ever. And it affected me so much, I had to sleep with the lights on in my room until I was almost 18. It was that traumatic, and I wish to never relive anything like this ever again. My name's Darren. I'm 25, 5'8", and 160 pounds, clean cut. I do not drink or do any drugs, not even smoke cigarettes. I'm very outgoing and also very open-minded to all possibilities. This event happened in 2009, during July on a Thursday night, at around 10 p.m. It had been raining earlier that day, so everything was still wet but dried up quickly due to the hot weather months we have in the state of Utah. This particular area that I was in has no sidewalks, just grass. Now, I can't remember exactly what brought me outside that night, but I've always loved being outdoors, no matter what time it is. It was a clear night, no clouds, and the moon gave light to everything. I could see for miles into the distance because it was so dark, without any lights, only the moonlight. I walked into my backyard when is where this happened, thinking there might be deer out since it's their mating season, and deer are everywhere in these parts. And I reached about halfway through my yard. It's not super big to begin with, and something caught my attention towards the edge of our backyard fence, to the right. Upon looking at what appeared to be a black silhouette of something moving around, just beyond our fence line, I noticed that it had an abnormally long, slender neck, kind of like a swan's but curving inward slightly to give it more of a snout-like appearance. It appeared to be sticking its neck to the ground, but I could only see its head and part of its body. It was very dark out there. No real light sources other than the moon, so it was hard for me to make out any colors, besides its dark shade of black, which made it blend in quite a bit with everything else around it. If it had not moved when I looked at it, I probably would not have seen anything at all. I felt uneasy because this thing was right behind our fence line, picking around in our yard, looking for something. So now I'm beginning to panic a little bit, thinking that this animal is potentially a Bigfoot, or was. But in that moment, even though I was scared, I decided to see if I could creep a little bit closer, which I did. And when I got about 20 feet from it, it quickly stopped, stood up on two legs, and stared at me right in the face, and then just swiftly disappeared. There's a large open field behind our house, and that's where it went off to. It was definitely not anything like I'd ever seen before in my life. I'm not sure what else to call it, other than a cryptid. I've never told anybody this story because, well, I'm embarrassed about running away like a little girl. But maybe somebody with a similar experience knows what it was. I'll be taking this story to the proper paranormal authorities, filing a report soon. When my grandfather was 22, he traveled to Utah with his brother and sister. They were living in Nampa at the time. While they were traveling through the state of Utah, they were near Goblin Valley when they spotted a tall, apish-like creature that was covered in black, thick fur, heading into an area where a cavern was. The three of them decided to follow after it. As my grandfather began crawling into the cavern, he saw these two red eyes staring back at him. When he made eye contact with whatever it was inside, the being screamed at him before getting up on its feet and running towards him, nearly taking my grandfather out. His story has never changed once, and has been the same every time he tells it. I researched this and found something similar to what my grandfather saw. He claims that whatever it was had human-like features, except for the face and body, which were more ape-like in his opinion, but claimed the face was hideous-looking and very deformed. I'm not 100% sure if this is a cryptid or paranormal based on his story, of course, and unfortunately, he passed away 3 years ago and never told anybody else this story. In fact, the only reason he ever shared the story with me is because he's known that I've been obsessed with the paranormal and all things strange. It would be great if I could research this more thoroughly. I wonder if it was a cryptid or possibly just a figment of his imagination. Either way, it makes for an interesting story. And for his time when he was younger, I don't think he's lying. There's no reason and way he could have made up something so horrific and strange. The whole concept of Bigfoot was not even around when he was 22. I am an atheist, or at least I thought I was before all of this. If anything, I'm very skeptical of anything paranormal. I have never seen a ghost, nor do I believe in them. I have, however, had several experiences that have left me completely baffled and cannot be explained by easy means. This story is one of those experiences. For you see, a little over 10 years ago, when I was still in high school, my family and I moved from a small town in northern Utah to a suburb of Salt Lake City. We had bought a new house on a large lot at the end of a cul-de-sac. My father had his first real big breakthrough in real estate, and so we wanted to put the money towards a nice house. The first few months we lived there were uneventful at best. However, about 3 or 4 months after moving in, my younger brother, who was about 8 or 9 at the time, would come running into our room right around midnight, hysterical, claiming that this monster was right outside of his room and going to take him. The first time, I immediately ran into my parents' room where I found them very upset as well. Apparently, my brother had been screaming so loud, the entire house had been shaken awake. When he calmed down enough, though, here's what he told us had happened. My brother would say that he woke up for no apparent reason in the middle of the night, and for some strange reason, he had this inkling in him to look towards his bedroom window, which is right next to his bed. It's a very small room with barely enough space for a bed and a dresser, let alone a window. Anyway, when he looked out the window, he saw something standing at the end of our cul-de-sac. He described it as a monster, and said it had huge glowing eyes, long gangly hands and claws, just standing there, looking right at him. He said the fear paralyzed him, and he could not move. The only thing he could do was scream for help. And finally, after what felt like an eternity, the monster turned and disappeared into thin air. My parents immediately contacted the police, who did come to our house and did search around a bit, but they didn't really find much of anything. We also had a few people come over to check out the house, see if they could find any explanation for what my brother saw, but again, nothing was found. This experience has haunted me for years, and I've never been able to explain it. We leave that house today, and have been living in a different home for the last 7 years. My brother insists this was not a dream or his imagination. He swears up and down he saw that monster looking back at him from the cul-de-sac on that night. And this has not been the first night or only night this has happened. This has been kind of a reoccurring nightmare over and over. And I say nightmare metaphorically. We've tried to do some research and can't really turn up much. I've tried to research this before, but never found out anybody else who has ever reported anything quite like this. It's almost as if this has happened in a completely different universe or something. I did find, though, that there is something called a cryptid, and it's called a skinwalker, and it's also rumored to live all over the southwestern portion of the United States. I have no idea if this could be what my brother saw or not, but it's the only thing I can think of. It was winter of 1996. I had just finished my master's degree and was traveling through the southwestern portion of the United States, specifically through Utah. I was going to complete the research for my doctoral dissertation. I had been visiting mainly Native American reservations over the course of a few months. The last reservation I visited, after returning to Salt Lake City, Utah, was the Ute Mountain Reservation. I was staying in one of the main tribal buildings with a number of other people who were visiting for various reasons. It was later in the evening when one of them had asked me if I wanted to go for a walk around an outdoor courtyard that he had used as his meditation space. He said it would be part of my welcome to this place if I went with him. He felt I needed to be a part of the energy that was present there. So, we walked around, and he talked about how it had become his place for meditation due to the energy he felt there. While we were walking, one of my friends who was standing on a porch nearby watched us, called out to me. She said that she could see some people coming up over the hillside where I'd parked my car earlier in the day. They were carrying something large between them, like a stretcher or a longboard. It looked like they might have been trouble carrying whatever it was where they were moving towards this main part of the building. It wasn't too far away from us, maybe 200 yards at most. So, we began walking in that direction, just casually talking, and my attention was really brought over there. Well, as we got closer, I could see that they were carrying indeed something that wasn't human. It was a large black creature. It was completely still and lying there. Those people who were carrying it were natives, and they looked terrified. As we got closer, I could see that the creature's body was completely covered in thick hair and limp. I don't remember anything else after that. I passed out from the shock of seeing something like that when I woke up. When I woke, I was inside and my friends were surrounding me, asking me if I was okay. They told me later that the creature had been killed by the tribal members who found it, and they'd brought it back to the main building. They were frightened. They had never seen anything like it themselves. I have no idea what it was, but it's something that still haunts me to this day. I can't help but think about what it might have happened if I had gone for that walk with the other person. I might not be here now. I mean, what if that creature ended up killing me? So many things about that whole sighting still baffle me. I may never know what really happened, but that experience has changed my life in ways that I can never imagine. Not so much in a traumatic sense, but in a way where it really showed me there are more things and creatures out there than we could ever imagine. My husband works construction, so the weekends are really the only time he gets off, and when he does, he's exhausted. So my husband and I decided to take a little trip out of state. As my husband and I were driving out in the country one evening, right about 11:10 to be exact, I remember it because I had just looked at the clock. We saw this fast, dark animal crossing the road ahead of us. I'll say this confidently. It was far too big to be a deer or a coyote, and yet too small to be a bear. Maybe not too small, but the proportions did not look right. We both felt an immediate sense of fear, though, when looking upon this thing. While I cannot be confirmed that what I saw this night is, in fact, anything other than perhaps a small bear or maybe a really large buck, I can confidently say that we felt an immediate sense of fear and dread. I live in Salt Lake City, Utah, and while I was living in Orem, which is south, my friend and I went out after midnight to help him look for his lost cat. A quick note, my friend, whom we'll call Richard, is very, very attached to this cat. They've grown up together, and him losing this cat was devastating. Being the good person that I am, I couldn't just help but, leave him there. Not without his cat. So I decided to go and help him. This is where we found ourselves in the Orem City Cemetery. For those that don't know, it's a rather huge graveyard, filled with many trees, monuments, and, graves. As we walked around, looking into every dark crevice and space between the street and light, I heard something rustling in one of the bushes just ahead of us. My friend and I were startled when we saw this very large, very dark figure standing on two legs, further, next to a headstone just about 20 feet away. It was hard to make out features because it was so dark, and at first, I assumed it was a homeless man. But that notion was immediately dismissed when we could both see just how big this thing was. We both just stood there, staring at each other for what felt like an eternity. And in fact, I wanted to ask you guys, have you ever seen the movie, The Fog? I can't remember who it's directed by or any of that, but I believe it came out in the 70s or 80s. Anyway, if you've seen it, you'll know what I'm talking about. However, there's a time in that movie where the fog rolls in and these ghastly black figures come out of the fog. They're just these black haunting silhouettes with red shining eyes. That's exactly what this looked like. Except the black silhouette wasn't as defined, not like where you could tell it was a person, like in the movie, but just this large, hairy thing. But the red eyes were spot on, just like in that movie. It slowly kind of lurched its body and moved over to the left, walking off casually. As terrified as me and my friend were, we bolted out of there, not wasting another second. Now, I've heard stories from around there as well. And in fact, one of my family members just so happens to be friends with somebody that patrols that graveyard at night. Imagine that. And he's told me stories too about seeing strange apparitions and strange dark figures. I don't know if any of these have any connections to what we saw, but I can say that whatever we saw was terrifying. One other thing. I know that Utah State is very enriched in paranormal. In fact, the whole southwestern section of the United States is. A lot of lost mining communities. Then you have the whole LDS, and that's a whole other ballgame. Don't forget, among the many bloody battles and wars that happened here between settlers and natives, and all the cults that come out here as well. It's a place with a lot of dark energy surrounding it. I wouldn't be surprised if all the evil spirits feed off all of this dark, bad energy. Oh, and one last thing. My friend eventually found his cat. Yeah, it was actually right around his house, even though his house is right around the cemetery, and that's the last place he saw his cat go, so maybe his cat was lucky and did not end up running into whatever that thing we saw was. Thank goodness. Okay, I've had some pretty strange stuff happen to me. Let me tell you about it. So, first and foremost, I'm from Utah, and one evening, I was driving home from work, and I went around a curve in a very rural road. Now, it should be known that I take this road very often. I try and take it as much as I can to avoid all the midnight traffic. The midnight part is a joke, of course, but I will say the evening traffic is quite unpleasant, and I try to avoid it as much as I can. I've driven this rural road many times, and have never had an issue, until this one time. So, I came around a very tight curve in the road, and I saw something coming up to the road. As my headlights illuminated more of the area around me, I could see that it was simply a deer. Innocent. Now, as soon as this deer got up to the middle portion of the road, things changed. I slowed down, expecting the deer to full-on bolt in front of my car, but instead it stops, turns to stare at me, and its eyes were bright red. I remember I said something probably not appropriate. And I swear to you, this deer, I'm assuming that's what it was, made this expression, almost like a scowl. I've never in my life imagined that a deer could make such an expression before, at all. In fact, it was strange and frightening. That's when I slammed my foot on the brakes, unsure of what to expect. And this deer, it kind of wiggled its entire body and stood up on two legs before falling back down again on all fours and running off at about 11 o'clock. And I just sat there with my foot firmly pressed on the brake, unsure of how to approach forward. I wasn't exactly sure what just happened or what I'd just seen. In fact, I could not even process what had just occurred. I thought to myself, was I dreaming or having some sort of crazy nightmare? I mean, this sort of thing doesn't just happen casually. This was something out of another world, out of a nightmare. And while I was terrified and very, very much so creeped out, I can't help but feel that there was something dark behind what I saw. That maybe what I saw was not just a deer, but something else. I'm not trying to allude to the thought that monsters exist, but come on, how do you explain this one? I've grown up and heard all sorts of creepy stuff about Utah, and all the things that happen around here. So I ask you, what do you think it could be? Was this a supposed skinwalker? Possibly a shapeshifter? Or did I somehow just imagine the whole thing? And perhaps I'm crazy. Perhaps I just imagined it all. But I just don't see that being possible. I'm not one to make up stories, and I have nothing to gain from sharing this. In fact, I don't even want my credentials out there. This is really just a memory that I'm hoping I'll forget, but I don't think that I ever will.